Last episode, we established why ISO 9001 exists. 1987. A disaster. A demand. A standard born from failure. Today we go one level deeper, because in 2015, the people who wrote ISO 9001 looked at what they had created and said, "This is good, but it is not good enough. Something fundamental has to change." And the concept they changed, the one idea they rewrote, is the thing that separates average quality systems from world-class ones. I'm going to give you that concept today. But first, you need to see what the old world looked like, because you cannot appreciate a revolution until you understand the problem it solved. Section 1. The 2008 World ISO 9001-2008. Let me be very clear. It was a good standard. Companies that implemented it properly, genuinely properly, built strong quality systems. So this is not about mocking 2008. It's about understanding its limits. Here's what the 2008 world looked like from the inside. The structure was clear, linear, logical. You had your quality management system. Management responsibility. Resource management. Product realization, measurement, analysis, and improvement. And near the end, there was a specific requirement called preventive action. Its purpose was simple. Prevent problems before they happen. Good idea. Correct instinct. But here's what happened in the real world. Companies documented the fact that they intended to prevent problems, then waited for the problem to arrive, then documented that, too. Preventive action became the world's most politely managed ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And that was the deeper issue. The problem with ISO 9001-2008 was not its intentions. The problem was its architecture. Because too often, the standard became a system of documented procedures. And once that happens, something dangerous starts to happen. If the documents look good, the company feels compliant. If the procedures are written, the company feels in control. If the records exist, the company feels safe. But a documented process that nobody actually thinks about is not a quality system. It is quality theater. It looks like a quality system. It sounds like a quality system. It generates mountains of paperwork that feel like a quality system. But ask that system, what could go wrong tomorrow? And it stares at you blankly. Ask it, what happens if your key supplier fails next week? Silence. Ask it, what are the 3 biggest risks to delivering customer requirements right now? Blank faces. Filed procedures. No real answer. That was the limitation. And the people who write the standard saw it clearly. ISO 9001-2008 often proved you had processes. ISO 9001-2015 would be designed to prove whether those processes were actually effective. And that is a much bigger shift than most people realize. Section 2. The 2015 Revolution. Then came September 2015, after years of revision, after global debate, after input from quality professionals across the world. ISO 9001-2015 was published. And the biggest change, the one the quality world is still fully absorbing today, was this. Risk-based thinking. That's the concept. And yes, before anyone says it, I know. That's technically 3 words, not 1, but in quality management, we treat it as one idea. We call it RBT, and if that bothers you, please feel free to raise a corrective action against me. That would actually be very on-brand for this series. Now here's why this mattered. Risk-based thinking is not just a new tool. It is a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at every process, every decision, every output. The 2008 standard asked, Do you have a process? The 2015 standard asks, have you thought about what could go wrong with that process? And what you are doing about it? That sounds like a small difference. It is not small. It is massive. In 2008, preventive action sat near the end of the standard as one isolated requirement. Something separate. Something you could treat like a box to tick. But in 2015, risk-based thinking is not trapped in one clause. It runs through the entire system. It shapes how you understand your organization, how leadership thinks, how you plan, how you operate, how you measure, how you improve. And here is the most important part. Risk is not just about what could go wrong. It is also about opportunity. A risk can be a threat, but it can also be the chance that something goes better than expected, if you are aware enough to act on it. That matters, because quality systems that only defend against failure are playing not to lose. But quality systems that also pursue opportunity? Those systems are playing to win. And that is the philosophical shift at the heart of ISO 9001-2015. 2008 asked, do you have a process? 2015 asks, have you thought about what could go wrong and what you are doing about it? That question is the difference between a quality system and a quality culture. Section 3. The 7 key changes. Now let's get specific. Because the 20 revision didn't just change one idea, it changed the structure of the entire standard. Here are the 7 biggest changes. Change 1. The structure. ISO 9001. 2008 had its own standalone structure. That worked, until companies started using multiple ISO standards at the same time. Quality, environment, safety, information security. Each standard had its own architecture, its own format, its own logic, and that made integration painful. So in 2015, ISO introduced the high-level structure, also known as Annex SL. Now the major management system standards share the same backbone. That means one organization can build a much more integrated system. One framework, less duplication, far less administrative chaos. Change 2. Context of the organization. In 2008, this wasn't formally required. In 2015, it became foundational. Organizations now need to understand what internal issues affect them, what external issues affect them, who are their interested parties, what is the actual scope of the quality management system. This sounds obvious, and yet a shocking number of organizations still cannot answer these questions clearly, which tells you a lot. Change 3. Leadership. This one was huge. In ISO 9001-2008, top management could appoint a management representative, usually the quality manager. And once that happened, quality often became that person's job, not leadership's job, not operations' job, not the business's job, one person's job. In ISO 9001-2015, that requirement was removed completely. And every management representative in 2015 had roughly the same emotional journey. First, existential panic, then slow realization. Because the new standard didn't make their role less important. It made it more important. It just stopped allowing them to be the only person carrying the system. And honestly, that was the problem all along. Leadership now has to demonstrate real accountability, not symbolic accountability. Real accountability, which is exactly where it belongs. Change 4. Risk and opportunity. This is where risk-based thinking becomes operational. Organizations are now required to determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. and to plan actions accordingly. And here's what's important. The standard does not force one specific tool. No mandatory FMEA, no mandatory risk register format, no mandatory template. ISO does not tell you how to do it. It simply requires that you do it properly, thoughtfully, systematically, and in a way you can demonstrate, which is exactly how a mature management standard should behave. Change 5. The Quality Manual. This one caused real panic, because for years companies had built thick, carefully polished quality manuals. And in 2015, ISO basically said, you can still keep it, but you don't have to. The mandatory quality manual requirement was removed. Instead, the standard introduced the broader concept of documented information. What matters now is not what you call the document. What matters is whether the information exists, is controlled, and is useful. A quality manual can still be valuable. Many companies still use one, but it is no longer mandatory. Which means somewhere, right now, a quality manager is still holding a 200-page manual they spent 6 months writing, and wondering what exactly happened to their life. To be fair, it may still be compliant, it may still be useful. It is now also optional. And that sentence describes both the manual and the quality manager after their 3rd internal audit of the year. Change 6. Performance Evaluation. ISO 9001-2015 strengthened performance evaluation significantly. Measurement now has to be more meaningful. Customer satisfaction has to be monitored systematically. Internal audits need objectivity and competence. Management reviews need proper inputs and proper outputs. In other words, these activities can no longer be ceremonial. They have to function as real decision-making tools, not meetings that happen because the calendar says so. Meetings that happen because the system is supposed to learn. Change 7. Organizational knowledge. This was completely new, and it was long overdue. ISO 9001-2015 explicitly asks organizations to identify the knowledge required to run their processes effectively and to protect that knowledge. That matters because one of the biggest hidden quality risks in the modern world is this. Your system works because a handful of experienced people are holding it together in their heads, and the moment one of them leaves, retires, burns out, or gets promoted, critical knowledge disappears. That is not a staffing issue. That is a quality risk. And ISO 9001-2015 finally treated it like one. Section 4. Why Annex SL really matters. Now let's go one level deeper. Because the structure change in 20 was not just formatting, it was strategy. Imagine you run a manufacturing company. You need ISO 9001 for quality. You need ISO 14001 for environmental requirements. You need ISO 45001 for occupational health and safety. Before this structural alignment, that often meant 3 systems, 3 audit styles, 3 planning models, 3 documentation structures, 3 management review formats, and a whole lot of duplicated work pretending to be sophistication. The harmonized structure changed that. Now companies can build integrated management systems. 1 context analysis, 1 audit program, 1 leadership review process, 1 shared structure. That's not just neater, that's smarter. Because if your company has multiple ISO certifications and they are still operating as isolated parallel systems, you are doing extra work for no real gain. Integration is not complexity. Integration is the removal of duplicated complexity. And that is one of the most strategically important things the 2015 revision made possible. ISO 9001-2015 didn't just modernize quality management. It helped create the architecture for integrated business excellence, quality, environment, safety, operating as one coherent management system. That is not just a certificate. That is competitive infrastructure. Section 5. The real-world test. Now let me challenge you, because this is where theory stops and reality starts. I want to give you 5 questions, real questions, the kind an auditor could ask you, and if you can answer all 5 clearly, from memory, without scrambling for documents, your system is probably much more alive than most. Here's question 1. Can you name your top 3 organizational risks right now? Not from your register, not from a spreadsheet. From memory, because if your risk register only exists for audit day, that is not risk-based thinking. That is documentation theater. Question 2. Does your top management actively engage with the quality management system, or did they sign the policy once and disappear into strategic mist? If I asked your managing director what your top quality objective is, what would they say? And yes, for many people, this is the point where confidence collapses. Because most quality professionals answer the first question quickly, then hit question 2, and suddenly need to just make one quick call. That pause is not a compliance gap. That pause is the distance between a quality system and a quality culture. Question 3. When did you last review your organizational context? Not when you first certified, not when the consultant told you to. When did you last genuinely revisit it? Because if your context hasn't changed in years, you may not have a live management system. You may have a historical exhibit. Question 4. How do you capture organizational knowledge when key people leave? Do you have a transfer process? Or are you still relying on tribal knowledge and optimism? Question 5. What changed in your quality objectives last year? Did they improve? Did they evolve? Did they become more ambitious? Because if your objectives have not changed in 3 years, your continual improvement process may not actually be continuous. It may just be ceremonial. And if that stings a little, good. That means we're getting close to something useful. Section 6. How to actually make the shift. So how do you move from a 2008 mindset to a real 2015 mindset? Here it is, the practical path. 5 stages. Simple, not easy, but absolutely doable. Stage 1. Audit your mindset, not your documents. Ask your team a brutally honest question. Are we genuinely practicing risk-based thinking, or are we writing about it for auditors? Because the gap between what your documents say and what your people actually do, that is your real quality gap. Stage 2. Build a live risk register. Not a spreadsheet you open 4 times a year. A live tool. Something your team actually uses. Something reviewed in real meetings. Something that drives decisions. If your risk register hasn't changed since certification, it is not a management tool. It is a fossil. Stage 3. Engage leadership and not performatively. Schedule a real 30-minute conversation with your managing director or CEO. Not a formal review, not a slide deck. A real conversation. Ask, what are our biggest quality risks this quarter? What are we doing about them? That conversation will do more for your quality system than a surprising amount of paperwork ever will. Stage 4. Protect organizational knowledge. Identify your most critical process owners, the people who carry irreplaceable operational knowledge. Now ask yourself, if they disappeared from the business tomorrow, what breaks? Then build transfer plans before the crisis arrives, not after. Stage 5. Set better objectives. Not safer objectives. Better ones. Objectives that stretch the business. Objectives that require real improvement. Because continual improvement does not mean repeating last year's targets with better formatting. It means getting measurably better, year on year. That is the shift. And you do not need to do all 5 at once. Pick the one your organization needs most urgently. And start this week. Section 7. Personal Close. Now let me tell you why this revision matters to me personally. I've built quality systems, I've certified quality systems, I've audited quality systems, and I've seen what happens when a procedure-heavy, thought-light system collides with a real-world crisis. The crisis does not care about your documented procedures. It does not care about your manual. It does not care how beautifully your corrective action register is formatted. But a system built on real thinking, real leadership, real awareness of risk, real protection of knowledge, that system behaves differently. It doesn't panic the same way. It doesn't collapse the same way. It can actually navigate pressure. And that is why risk-based thinking matters. Not because it satisfies an auditor, because it helps an organization survive reality. That is the real value. ISO 9001-2015 matters because the real world requires it, not because certification does. 2008 asked, "Do you have a process?" 2015 asks, "Have you thought about what could go wrong?" That is the difference between a quality system and a quality culture. And culture, unlike paperwork, can survive a crisis. 2 episodes in, you now know why ISO 9001 exists, and you know what fundamentally changed in 2015. Next episode, we leave history behind, and we go to work. Episode 3, The 7 Quality Management Principles. The DNA behind everything ISO 9001 is trying to do. 7 principles that shape world-class organizations, whether they realize it or not. I'm going to break down all 7, with real examples, real consequences, and yes, at least one system that ignored all of them at the same time. That story does not end well. If you've ever worked inside a quality system that looked compliant on paper but collapsed in real life, drop it in the comments. I read them, and some of the best examples may show up in future episodes, because quality is not what you inspect at the end. It is what you forge into every decision from day one. Episode 3. Let's build something.